Have any? I thought I was going to ask if any of them have ever contacted you.
Well,
maybe they have.
I heard that Elizabeth Edwards. This is way before all the hubbub that just happened. The pilot aired, I guess, in September, and I heard from CBS publicist that she had called to say, please tell Julianna, I think it's wonderful how she's portraying her.
Oh.
May I have her email? And, when they got back to her, I was like, yes, give her my email. I'd love to. Haven't heard from her since, and I'm sure I never will. But she's the only one so far. I think if I were Sildo or any of them, I doubt this is the show I would tune into on Tuesday nights.
Two things. We see the real steel in this woman's spine, for one thing, but also her mothering instinct comes out because her son is vulnerable.
Yeah.
And that's kind of an interesting aspect of the character, isn't it?
Yeah, I would say it's 80% of her character is a mother to these children. It's, she has to protect them, be strong, and also make sure she's respected. So it's a very tough role, I think. And this is their father. I mean, it's so tenuous.
Yeah.
I always think, well, what would I do? What would I do? What would I do? And I can't imagine what I would do. I'm in a very loving marriage, and the idea that anything like that would happen, and I see my husband with my son, and I would never want my son to think ill of him. So how do you do that? And I myself am from a divorced family, and I always, whenever they would speak ill of each other, it would throw me into such terror, because then whose side do you take? It's a horrible place for a child to be. So, not that it happened that much in my childhood, but I can't, it's such a important role for a parent to protect their child from how they feel about each other, if it isn't loving.
And as it's being written, do you feel like they're not trying to make the Chris Noth character a villain, really, right? They're trying to make him have been, obviously, and made this colossal mistake in his life, but he's not. I don't think they're trying to, because it doesn't look like they want that in this series, right? They don't want that to be about friction.
No, I think, what's really fascinating is I really think the way his character is written is that, yeah, I did that, but he's such an alpha dog.
Yeah.
And this is what's becoming interesting now is we're shooting, what happens when he comes home, and how do we deal with that now?
Right.
And there really is this side of him where in his head, he's gonna get back into politics. We're gonna have our bedroom back, and like everything's gonna go back to normal.
Right.
But it's not because he's disrespectful. It's because he really assumes that he has that kind of right. It's just inherent in who he is. And it's fascinating to play because he hasn't been with her while she's gotten a backbone.
Right, and gotten a job and established herself as a really credible attorney.
Right.
And he's going to be wearing a
ankle bracelet, a monitor, yeah.
Right. So that means he'll not be able to come out of the apartment, right?
He's 24 hours in the apartment. He can't cross the
right, but it does open up the show a little bit to the fact that you'll be interacting with him a little more easily because you have to go to jail to see him. And I wonder if that's like taking things in a new direction that is going to be interesting.
It's definitely going to be interesting. It's complicated. It's very multi-layered.
This is the second law show you've done in a row, right? You did a brief show on Fox.
Yes.
And I don't know whether or not you feel like that's comfortable being I mean, when you were in a medical show, you had to know jargony stuff all the time.
Yeah,
That probably made no sense to you, at least initially.
Yeah.
But I wonder if the same thing happens here, where they throw things at you, and you're like, "Oh, what is that?" Okay.
Yeah, only this time, thank God, I married a lawyer, so I can go, honey, how do you say that, and what the hell does it mean? And so I'm actually much more well informed now.
That's good.
Because the first year of VR, I used to look everything up in a medical dictionary, but that didn't last long. You're like, what is it? Just you get so tired. So now I feel a little bit more informed.
This show is also, although it's shot here in New York, it's set in Chicago.
I know.
And
I have
I
this
wonder
history
if,
with
like, are
Chicago.
you like, is that like your lucky city?
It's my lucky city, obviously, and
Yeah.
yet I've never lived there, but I love it.
Yeah. And this show has not really gone to Chicago, right?
We haven't. I mean,
maybe-
the beauty of New York is that it really doubles.
It looks like any city. Yeah.
Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and most parts of Queens look
Mhm.
a lot like Chicago.
Right. Yeah.
Don't
It's
tell
be-
them that.
More so than Vancouver would have, I think.
Much more so.
Yeah.
We shot the pilot in Vancouver,
Uh-huh.
and I personally can tell in terms of the production value.
Yeah. Mhm. But you're in New York specifically because that's what you wanted, right? I mean,
Yes.
you really want, because this is where you want to work, right?
Well, there's several reasons. One is this is my home, and as much as I love doing ER, I was out of my element there. And it's one thing to go away and do a movie for 3 months. It's fun and exciting.
Mhm.
You learn a new city, and then you come home. But a TV gig is a never-ending train ride, and my home is here, and I feel more just alive here. I need the weather. I need 4 seasons. It's just who I am. I grew up on the East Coast, and
Mhm.
so that's and in terms of knowing what it's like to try and maintain a relationship in this crazy business of Hollywood is you should probably pretty much stay in the same city.
Yeah.
It helps.
Yeah. Well, you grew up not far from here in Spring Valley. Is that right?
I was born in Spring Valley. I
Uh-huh.
didn't really grow up there. I mean,
You went to England, you said, right?
We lived everywhere, yeah.
Uh-huh.
And then I went to high school in New Hampshire.
Uh-huh. So
But
you
I went to college here at Sarah Lawrence.
right. So, but you have a pretty good affinity for the New York area.
Oh yeah.
And,
Yeah.
And
I consider myself a New York. My father was always here, so wherever we were, I felt.
well, your father is an interesting story,
My father is
Right?
an interesting story. Yes.
and you might know something that her father did. What did your father do?
Oh, I'm so glad he's not here right now. He's mortified. His brother is, though. My Uncle Mike is here somewhere. He wrote, my father wrote Plop Plop Fizz Fizz. Oh, what a relief it is.
He was an ad guy in New York?
He was an ad guy, yeah.
Yeah. So like in
He
the
was-
Mad Men era, I guess, right?
He was a madman,
Yeah.
but my father, I was such a fantastic character because my father truly can't watch that show, Mad Men, which is it's one of my favorite shows.
Right. Mine too.
Because he can't relive those rooms. Because my father was the only ad man who was a vegetarian, didn't drink or smoke.
Oh man.
So he would go into these meetings and come out always with a headache, and
Yeah.
they'd sit down to steak dinners and martinis. That's what they did. And my dad was, he was revolutionary because in those days, if you didn't eat meat, you were dead.
How did he come about with the Alka-Seltzer? Well, how did that happen? Do you know?
Well,
Do you
him
know
and
the story?
his partner, Bob Wilvers, his art director, were put on the Alka-Seltzer campaign. And, honestly, I should get the full story from him. All I remember as a little kid is watching him sit there. And, my father was a philosophy major at Dartmouth. All he ever wanted to do was read books and live in a cabin somewhere and be left alone. And here he was, suddenly he had 2 ex-wives, a new wife, 3 kids, and he had to make a living. And he was a good poet. And poets, when they need to make money, go into advertising. And so, and I remember him thinking, it just plops and it fizzes. It plops and it fizzes. And out came Plop Plop Fizz Fizz.
Somebody told me, actually today, I mentioned this to one of the guys who covers advertising for us, and apparently one of the reasons they did Plop Plop Fizz Fizz was because Alka-Seltzer wanted people to use 2 at a time.
You're probably right.
And that would double their sales.
That's hysterical.
Yeah.
Well, it still is to this day. There's this 100 best commercials ever made.
You're right.
And it always comes in number 2.
Number 2.
You know what number 1 is?
Boy, I don't know.
My baloney has a first name. I was like, Dad, you got beaten by meat.
And he was a vegetarian. That's awful. That's the irony of that.
I know, it's kind of funny.
Well, you also mentioned to me that you were not allowed to watch television.
Well, I wasn't.
I mean,
We
so
didn't
here
have a
you
TV.
are. Here you are, supporting
know.
your family on
On
television.
TV, it is
Yeah.
funny. It's funny because, of course, now my parents, who literally, when I was on ER, I think my mother still had a hanger for an antenna